All right, so we're going to go over Chapter 10 now, all right, on Flexbox. And this morning I sent you this. It has 4 URLs in it, all right. Brad Traversy's got about a 25 to 30 minute CSS Grid layout crash. He calls this stuff crash courses because he also offers courses that you pay for. I'm actually one of his patrons, so I pay $10 a month, and he sends me basically his courses once he gets them. Otherwise, they're usually $10 a course. And without going into it in too much detail, he's going through a lot of stuff in his life right now, and probably the $120 is welcomed by him. I don't know. I'm not going to speak for him. All right, this is the W3 Schools thing on Grid. These are a couple things that I found in here. Learn CSS Grid and Grid by example. This, if you haven't seen it, this is pretty cool. Webflow is one of those packages. It's sort of like Wix. If you've ever seen Wix.com, where you can drag and drop and build your own website, it's kind of the same thing, but it works with Grid. All right. So just to show you that stuff quickly, because I don't want to waste my time and I don't want to waste your time. This is his crash course. And I'm not going through a second of it, but just so you know, like I said, it's 28 minutes, basically. All right? And he does stuff, I think, in a very straightforward manner. You know, he's got a Boston accent, which he always kids about himself, but I think he's just very good. This is the stuff that's out there. We're going to start going through this in just a minute. That is on W3 Schools. It's good. It's not great because it's not real comprehensive, but it's good. It's well done. These are just things I found online. This is Learn CSS Grid. And guess what? It's under learncssgrid.com. Now, the bad news is it ain't short. But if you really want to learn this, it might be worth your time to try to go through it. Even if you go through one of these a day, you do it over 2.5 weeks. All right. This is another one I found online that's called Grid by Example, which has got a bunch of different examples of ways that you can set up different grids. All right. And this is the Webflow site. It's webflow.com. All right. And this is what I want to show you on this, and then we're going to start. Make this a little smaller. Okay. We just finished with Flexbox. The picture didn't come out real well. It's a little bit fuzzy, just so you know. But we just finished Flexbox. What Flexbox does is it basically lets you set up a lot of stuff as rows or columns. You should know that by now. That's what you just did your test on. But it does it in a one-dimensional format. So in other words, it's an entire row or it's an entire column. So you can't make stuff that looks like this. You can do that with Grid. So Grid allows you to do things in more of a two-dimensional type of way. I may have said earlier that this is 2D and this is 3D. Really, there is no 3D tool. Really, this is one-dimensional, and that's two-dimensional. All right, just so you're aware of that. So again, notice what we can do in here. This is one row. All right, and stuff is different sizes. Here, that's one row, and that's one row. So you can do a lot of stuff. You can set up websites in a lot of different ways that are very hard, if not impossible, to do with Flexbox. All right? Okay. Let's take, and I don't want to spend much time on this, but let's just take a look at what they have here on W3 Schools. The good news is, it literally, if you look, it's three lessons right here. That's it. 3 screens. So, CSS Grid Layout Module. Quite often, this is the kind of thing that you're going to want to have. Now, where it says header and it's got menu may be on the side. That could be an aside. That could be something else. It doesn't matter really what it is. But you'll notice that you're able to really lay stuff out any way you want to lay it out on the screen. And the real good news about using Grid is that you are still able to use the stuff, align self, align items that you used in Flexbox. You can still use those in Grid. The big thing is at the top where you had been saying display flex. Now you got to say display grid. All right. But other than that, they work very similarly. except that you can do more with it. Again, what I like about this, and I'm not going to run through these, you can if you want to. The Try It Yourself has got all the code in there. To me, that's a great way to learn. Browser support, basically every browser now supports it. All right. So they show you this. Again, typically, there's nothing magical about the name grid container. There's nothing magical about the name grid item. But people oftentimes call them things like that because it really makes it easier for you to see what's what. All right? So this is a container. You'll notice in this case, they're all the same size. But as you go through here and you look, when you say display grid, it's not going to look really any different. But you can display things in a columnar format, and this is an important thing to show you if you look on the screen here. You can also set up gaps. So you can automatically set up column gaps and row gaps. And it'll basically fill that up with white space. All right, I think you could probably color that stuff also if you wanted to do that. But it's really nice because it makes delimiters for you. And again, just like we had with Flex, it's automatically responsive. All right, you're not going to have a test that's going to be on just this. You're not. So again, they showed you the column, they show you the rows, there's the gaps that I just mentioned. So you can run through this if or as you have a desire to do so. All right, then there's just a bunch of examples. So then they talk about the grid container and they talk about the grid items. So if you go through that, it's not that you're going to necessarily spend a lot of time on that, but if you spent a half an hour, you'd probably have a really good beginning. All right. Mr. Gudmisted, I have not looked. He's probably done his own lecture on this. One thing that I've realized that I'm going to have to do this summer, hopefully if I get time, I hope this pandemic is solved just like the rest of you. But I'll tell you one thing, believe it or not, that working at home this summer, there were days I got so much more done than I got done here. I just would say, I shut the door where I got my little mini office in my bedroom, and I'm going to work today. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to build a website from scratch, and I'm going to, every single chapter, I'm just going to add stuff to it in every chapter. I'm going to go through the stuff in every chapter. And every time I do that, I'm going to push it out to GitHub. So literally, there'll be a whole bunch of them out there. If we go through 18 chapters in the book, there'll be 18 of them. All right, and I'm going to add some JavaScript and some jQuery. All right. Okay, so again, there's the container stuff and there's the item stuff if you have an interest. All right, so let's jump into the book. And again, it's not that if you use Grid, you can't use Flexbox, or if you use Flexbox, you can't use Grid. You can use them jointly. You can still take some of your site and not set it up. You can still use flows. All right. I will tell you that by and large, I have never met a web developer in my life who said, "Oh, I use floats all the time. I love them." By and large, they hate them. Because, oh yeah, I forgot to clear my floats, or I thought when I floated this left that everything else, and it didn't work, and whatever. Typically, they use Grid and they use Flexbox because they're easier once you've worked with them for a while to use. All right. So let's go through what's in here, and then we'll take a break. So getting started with grid layout, how to define the grid areas, a responsive web page that uses grid, common page layouts that use grid. I would say if you're going to concentrate on anything in here, have it be the last 15 or so pages. Look at the responsive web page they have that uses grid, and then at the very end here, right here, so it's what, 382, they show you the different kinds of sites that you can set up using this. All right? And again, you might look at that and go, I'd never want to do anything like that. Don't be thinking in that frame of mind. Because if you want to get a job as a web developer, it's what they want. There are always going to be people who tell you that they want you to do this for them, whatever this is. And in the back of your mind, you're going to think that's really stupid. I would never want that, but you know what? They're paying you. Okay? So they show you some examples of what you can create. And then They even get into what they call advanced grid layouts. All right. Now, if you're going to have something like this is probably going to be a SPA. It's probably going to be a single-page application. All right. What I hope to have us do next week is when we start with Bootstrap, we'll start with Bootstrap and with the single-page app, and then we'll eventually go to multi-page apps. So we'll still have our home, we'll have our about, we'll have our contact, but when we first do it, we'll have it all on one page. And the good news is, if you go, well, that doesn't sound like it's going to be easy. Literally, you'll probably have to write about 2 lines of code, and we'll drag in everything else we need. That's how hard it is. That doesn't mean that you won't have to go back and add some CSS to pretty it up, or to make it yours, or to add a Google font, or whatever. All right? Okay, so like I said, I would probably go and take some time and look at that. So I'm going to jump back here. And again, what we're going to do then, it's 8:57. Let's come back at 9:10, and we're going to go over Chapter 10. My guess is it'll take probably till around 10 o'clock. The rest of the period then will be lab time for you. You already know what we're doing for the rest of the week. Tomorrow I'm going to hit on 11 and 12. We're going to start right away, and boom, the rest of the period will be lab. Then 13 and 14, boom, the rest of the period will be lab. 15 and 16, boom, the rest of the period will be lab. Except on Friday, we are going to go over those tests. That probably will take almost an hour to go through if we're going through 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. All right? Questions on anything? All right, be back then, like I said. Please be back by 9:10. I'm going to continue on then. So again, I'm at the beginning of Chapter 10. And I don't disagree with the author here, but, you know, when we started, we basically just threw a bunch of HTML out there. Then in about Chapter 3 or 4, we added some CSS, but it was pretty rudimentary. It was pretty simple CSS by and large that we added. Then, and he doesn't mention that here, but in Chapter 8, we started talking about responsive website design and media queries. All right, and you saw how to do that, but that was basically using a lot of floats, etc. Then in Chapter 9, we went to Flex. So this is Chapter 10, and as it says, now you learn how to use grid layout, also known as grid, to lay out both rows and columns, which it says makes it easier to develop web pages with more complex layouts. That is true, but it's like anything else. It's a learned skill. I mean, I still sometimes when I try to do things, I'm like, oh, geez, and I didn't realize something worked the way that it did. All right. So as it says there, in the example they're going to show on the next page, it's got the basic components that are in there. There is a container, which is basically the holder. All right. It could be the web page. And in this case, it's got 4 rows and 4 columns. Notice as it says, the rows and columns are referred to as grid tracks. You don't have to memorize any of this. All right. 2 adjacent row and column grid lines form a grid cell. It's kind of like a spreadsheet when you think about it. All right. Any 2 or more grid cells that form a rectangle can be defined into an area. All right. And there's more stuff in here too. Again, the spaces between are sometimes called gutters or alleys. So they've got a picture here that's meant to be a little bit, I think, kind of 3D-ish, so you can see what they look like. Now, there's nothing wrong with the example, except if I would have made it, I probably wouldn't have had the same number of rows and columns. I wouldn't have made it that symmetrical. Maybe they did it that way for a reason. I don't really know. So again, here are the different terms that you should at least become familiar with. I have not even looked at your test, your written test for Chapter 10, but a lot of times they ask stuff like this. Typically in these tests, they're one of 2 things. Either you got to look up a term, or they show you some code and they go, what is this going to do? And you're all smart people in here, really. That if you're doing one of these and you're like, geez, I have no idea what it'll do, write yourself a little program and put it in there. That's the easiest way to tell what it'll do. All right, again, it's got pretty much full browser support. Notice, as I said, it's a 2-dimensional layout in CSS 3. that allows you to lay out things in a more efficient way. So how do you create a basic grid? Well, we sort of talked about this already. Here's the properties. So again, you're going to want to say display grid when you do this. And when you look in here, you'll notice what you can work with. Okay? Notice also there are shortcuts. So in other words, if you're setting both rows and columns with template rows and with template columns, you can just say grid template and give it 2 values. The same thing with that gap area that we talked about. Row gaps, column gaps. If you're setting both a row gap and a column gap, instead of grid row gap and grid column gap, you can do grid gap. This is very similar to what we talked about earlier in the semester, where we said you can type, for example, margin left, margin right, margin top, margin bottom, or just margin and give it 4 values. Same with padding. It's the same type of an idea. So as they show you right here, this is a simple div. Here's the key things. So let's look at these. So we've got this right here. Got this div, and it's got what? 2 rows. Each row has 3 columns. So it's a 2x3 grid. Get used to, just so you know this, that when you are talking about something like this, or for example, like this. So if I came in here, just go to an empty area, all right? And if you were looking at a spreadsheet, it's the same kind of an idea. For instance, if I go into here, it says right here that I am in cell E131. Well, technically that means I'm in column E, so I'm 5 columns over and I'm 131 cells down. That said, when you get used to talking about this stuff, it's row by column, so you'll always want the row, the stuff you do, the row will come first. Because I've had people ask, well, could I put the column first? And my response is not to be a smart aleck, but yeah, but you probably confuse people. Because in programming terminology, it's always row by column, not column by row. All right, so look what we have here. Display grid. All right, and what does it say here? Well, to define the rows and columns in a grid, you code 1 value for each row and 1 for each column, and you separate them with spaces. If you use the grid template property, you code a / between the row and the column. What does that mean? It means right here, row, column. All right. Again, the best way for you to learn this is to play with it. All right. And you'll notice grid gap. So we've got 15 pixels along the row line, 20 pixels along the column line. Does that make sense? Again, I'm not going to read to you. You can see the stuff that's in there yourself. You don't have to put in those gutters either if you don't want to. If you want stuff to literally run together, maybe that's what you want. You know, it can look really nice to do that. It can look really bad. I mean, it can be overdone very easily. All right. So how to set the size of your grid tracks. The other way that you can do this is actually the recommended way. That's the good news. The bad news is it's a little bit harder when you're first working with it to understand. So rather than giving, for example, let's say that I wanted one to have a width of 100 pixels and another one to have 3 times the width, so 300 pixels. All right? It's recommended that rather than using pixels, because again, pixels are absolute values, you use what are called fractions, which are FRs. All right? So as it says, it represents a fraction of the available space in the grid container. And it can get confusing. If you've got patterns that you want to have repeat, as it says here, you can use the repeat. All right? And here's an example that uses that. Okay, so what do we have? We've got 2 rows and we've got 3 columns. And they show you the code. Notice you can mix. Not that everything has to be symmetrical. Again, that's one of the advantages of working in this more 2D type of layout, is just the fact that you can make things of different sizes. Not only that, it's legal, legitimate, or whatever, that you can make just one cell be of a different size, one of these cells, not two like we see right here. And they show that again at, well, here's some examples, I guess. All right, you can see how this actually is a pattern. All right, 50 pixels, then some kind of a thing with a fraction. All right, etc. And there's a 20 pixel gap. Again, take advantage of the fact that you have all the code for the book in here. Bring up something if you're confused on it. Just start changing numbers. You know, make a copy so you've got the original, but just go in there and change a bunch of numbers. Change colors, change whatever. All right. Okay, sometimes though, that's too hard to do. So what you can do is you can set part of it, and you can tell the rest to autofill or autofit. So in other words, what you say is, I'm going to set up, maybe the first two columns, system, you set up whatever's left, and you just take all of it. All right. And they give you an example of doing that in here as well. When you do this, not that you have to, but you can set a minimum and a maximum. All right, so you can set minimum and maximum types of values. So notice here, when it's 360 pixels, all right, all of a sudden when you get there, it can only fit 4 of these, but when you stretch out the size of your container to 720, okay, and we've told them to basically all be the same size in here, right, now they can all fit. This is the kind of thing that as a web developer, a lot of times what's going to happen is you're going to get what's known as a wireframe, which is almost like a real crude little picture, and that somebody, or it might be literally, somebody goes into Photoshop and Photoshops exactly what they want a page or pages to look like. And they'll go, now build it. All right? And that's what you do. This is one way of having a lot more latitude, being a lot more liberal as far as the way you lay things out. So again, they show examples in here of the min-max. They show examples in here throughout this of everything. All right. Now, when you look in here, what you should notice is this is looking, the stuff they show in here, this is looking more like Flexbox. And the good news is, since you already learned Flexbox, they work basically the same way. So as it says, you can justify content to what? Start, end, stretch, etc. You can justify individual items. Justify self. So, and again, in other words, if you want one cell in there, you know, in your picture, so to speak, to look different than the rest. Same thing with aligning. Align it to the start, align it to the end, align it to the center. And as always, they give you some examples. Remember these, hopefully, the space between and the space around and the space evenly. So you can lay this out any way you want to lay it out on a page. Why is this important? Well, I will tell you that when we come in at the end of the semester and you're looking at building your portfolio, you want your portfolio to stand out. I would right now be going in and be thinking about what I want to put in that portfolio. I might go out to Google Fonts right now, not this second, and start thinking about what fonts I want. Start thinking about different color combinations. All right. What font awesome icons. All right. Because my guess is, and I could be wrong here, I don't know, but probably most of you have Facebook and or Instagram. If you don't, if you haven't gone out to LinkedIn.com, you really should, and you should set yourself up a LinkedIn profile. You should have a LinkedIn, all right? And, you know, I've had people who have started this class, and at the beginning of the class, they've already bought their own domain. You know, AngieShelton.com type of thing. That way she knows that she can take everything and she can put it all out there. All right? So these are the common values. Again, we've talked about those already. As it says, you can also align with the grid area horizontally and vertically. So what they show for most of the rest of this in here is how you can do this. Now again, you might look at this and say, well, you know, there's a lot of wasted space, there's a lot of this, there's a lot of that. Yeah. All right. But remember that if somebody's looking at it on their phone, you're probably going to write media queries where you're going to stack all this stuff anyway. All right. And that's going to be one nice thing that you're going to learn real fast when we do the Bootstrap stuff, that it'll make that hamburger menu for you automatically. You won't have to use the jQuery, Flick, or whatever that thing is that we put in there. All right. But again, you look at this, this is the way a lot of these things are laid out. Now they're showing it with colors, and it's a black and white book. All right. But, you know, this logo might be big, might be small. This is going to take up this whole area. You might make the logo smaller. There's all sorts of stuff that can happen. You might have a gap in here. You might not have a gap in here. Again, image, this is typically, yeah, this might be an image. These might be images. That might be what's on your home page. All right, you're going to see how you can set this stuff up in Bootstrap. And after you've done that, we'll even look at other packages which are even more drag and drop than Bootstrap are. Free packages that are out there. So again, what we like about this book, they show you a picture, then they show you the HTML. Now it says some of the CSS, but you should have all of it, all right, if you bring that stuff up. And I'm not saying, you know, yeah, this is how your portfolio should be laid out. You might not want that. You might have an idea already of what you want. All right. You know, to me, I've done my job if I get 8 of these portfolios at the end of the semester, and they all look radically different from one another. That's a good thing. All right, because you want them to stand out. All right. As it says, how to define the grid areas for elements. It says how to use numbered lines. A little confusing. Notice grid row and grid column. All right. So again, what is that? That's 1, 1. All right. That's 1, 2. 1, etc. type of thing. And really the only way that this is going to make any sense is for you to go over these. I did notice, and Mr. Gudmisted, he did a lecture on this last October, where he's got he's got 2 grid tutorials out here. One that's 12 minutes. I think there was another one that was longer, but I don't remember where it is. All right. Yeah, you can, instead of using numbers, you can name the lines. All right. I think that, you know, wouldn't have been hard to give a test on this that would have confused the hell out of everyone, and everybody probably would have failed it. Maybe even I would have failed it. I mean, what are we getting out of that? Nothing. But what we're going to look at in just a minute, and I'm going to send it to you, is the homework, or the homework in the labs for Chapter 10. All right. Template areas, again, as it says, you can break your grid up into areas. So notice what they've done there. Head area, they've got navigation area that's running along the side. They've got section areas. And finally, they've got a footer area. And you might look at that and say, well, I'd never use that. You'd be surprised if you look at, for example, footers that are out there. To me, sometimes it's amazing the stuff people try to shove into a footer. They're just big. And they might have the information about their company here. They might have, over here, they might have address, some other stuff. Here they might have all their social media icons, for example. All right? Again, you're given the CSS. Now, this is going to be kind of important where it says how to use a 12-column grid concept. Because, as an example, Bootstrap works on 12. It's a number of 12s. What do I mean? That by default in Bootstrap, when you set up an area, this would be 1 row. And each row can be cut into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 pieces. You don't have to cut it. You can have it be 12 pieces long, just one thing of 12. 2 of 6, 3 of 4, 1 of 5, and 1 of 7. You get the idea. There's all sorts of different combinations that you can use. And then you can go down to the next one. It can be the same or it can be different. All right? And they're showing how to set that up using Grid. Again, much of this stuff, I've read a lot of articles on here. All right? And I'm even on the stuff that's in the book. And a lot of people believe that Bootstrap, that we're going to be going over for the next couple weeks, is, although it's very popular, it's kind of dying because it's kind of hard in there to do some of the stuff that you can do with Grid. I will tell you that if you take the time and you can become good at Grid, and you can show that in an interview for a web developer position, I'm going to guess you're going to get the job. All right? There's a guy on the net, his name is John Sonmez, and I follow him. Okay, and he's a very different guy. He grew up as like a chubby kid, and he got into high school and later, and he decided, you look at him now, he looks like he's a power lifter, so he looks a lot different. But he really speaks his mind. And he talks about, in his opinion, having a great website isn't the most important thing. He thinks that everybody, including you, including me, we should all create a blog. All right? And if nothing else, have your own website and have a blog in your website. He said once he started to do that, he literally had companies calling him, offering him jobs. And he even said, "You mean you want me to come in for an interview?" "No, we want to offer you a job over the phone." Hadn't even met him. And he was like, "Why are you doing this?" "Well, we've got half the people who work here read your blog every day. They've learned a lot. We think we could learn a lot from you." All right. So, as already mentioned, we're now going to go in and look at a responsive web page that uses the Grid layout. They keep harping on this town hall thing in here, and that's what they're using throughout. As it says, the figure on the next page will show the speaker page that uses a Grid layout. It says if you compare the desktop of this to the one in Chapter 8, you'll see that they're almost identical, but in mobile layouts, it's changed around. So again, this is very similar to what we've looked at before. All right, and here's how it would look on a mobile device. All right, again, I don't want to read to you. And notice if you look in here, it's not that media queries go away. With media queries, you have the ability to say, hey, there are breakpoints in here, and when you reach those breakpoints, I want something different to happen as far as how something shows on the page. All right? When we get into it in a week or so, for example, if I type in here Bootstrap breakpoints, they will show you. All right? And you can set this stuff up. One thing that they had to add, I think it was in version 4, Bootstrap 5 is in beta right now, but they've always had, for sizes, they've had extra small, small, medium, and large. All right, if you say I don't see those there, you will. Okay, but they added extra large because now a lot of people, the stuff didn't really resonate super well if you were looking at it like on a projection screen or whatever. All right, so they're trying to cover all their bases. So again, they show you first the HTML, and you'll notice it really hasn't changed very much from the way we've set it up before. All right, then they show you, as it says, the CSS that uses template areas, and they show you exactly how it's set up. All right, remember, again, I can't say this kind of stuff to you too much, that when you're creating your portfolio, etc., when you're creating anything that you're going to share with other people, you want what you do to stand out in a good way. I mean, you don't want it to stand out where you're using the most hellaciously ugly colors or the worst fonts or you have everything bold, but you want it to stand out where people go, wow, that gal really knows what she's doing. That guy really knows what he's doing, type of an idea. All right? I mean, ideally what you want is you want them to look at what you've got out there and you want them to say, we've got to interview this person. All right? So again, as it says, the CSS that controls the page layout, so header, footer, notice again media queries. Not always, but again, you always want to set it up so when your browser is that small, Okay, when it is that small, if somebody's looking at it on a phone, you want it to look presentable. And it's up to you, or if you're creating it for somebody, for them to decide, well, I mean, we got this really cool picture, but on a phone it looks terrible. They might say, then don't put it on a phone. All right? Or they might say, well, show me how it looks on the phone. And they'll decide. Maybe they want to keep it. I've said this kind of thing to you before, but if I come out here and I hit F12, all right, and I bring this up, remember that right over here, that's the toggle device toolbar, and you can see I've already got it on, and this is how it's going to look on a Pixel. Now, most people today don't go all the way down to an iPhone 5 because it's so small. You know, there aren't that many people anymore with an iPhone 5. But if you come in here, you can already tell then with an iPhone X, which is typically what most people have. I know it's not going to be that small, but I've been playing around with this. But you can see exactly what the dimensions are. You can go up and you can check it on a Pro, etc. All right, so that's 1024. But this is a good start. All right. As you go in, you want to start looking at anything you create on different browsers. You want to run different, either emulators that you can have for different browser versions, for different types of devices. This is just one of the ones that exists. So here's CSS, as it says, that uses a 12-column grid. And again, it's up to you to lay this out any way you want to lay it out. All right. Some of the stuff that we do when we're working in Bootstrap, we'll go, wow, that's cool that you can do that. Other times we'll be like, well, that isn't hard. Yeah, but we're not going to have, there's no code that we're going to have to do other than grabbing something and dragging it onto our system. All right. Now I don't want to waste your time, but I just want to show you this. So I'm going to go here to GetBootstrap.com. All right, this is the site. And notice it's 4.5. We can come down here and you can go back to version 3. When they usually jump up a version, it's not a good thing. And what I mean is, usually if you've got something in version 3 and you run it in version 4, there's a good chance it'll break. And version 5, the same thing may happen. I don't know. All right. But what I want to show you is I'm just going to go over here to documentation. I'm going to jump down. There's a starter template right here. Just going to grab this, take it, I'm going to throw it into here. All right, right now it's not going to show much of anything because all it's got in there is an H1 with Hello World on it. All right, but just to show you, so now I'm going to come over here. I'm going to go under my documentation. I want to go to, well, I want to go to components. There we are. Go to components. I'm going to go down here to navbar, all right, and I'm just going to grab the first one that's there. This one, it's not the one I'd use, but I could make changes to it if I wanted to. So I'm going to grab all that code. I'm going to copy it to the clipboard. I'm going to go back to here. My H1 I'm going to get rid of for now. I'm just going to paste this in. All right, there's my navbar. Underneath that, I'm going to add what's called a jumbotron. All right. And I'm just, again, going to grab the first one that's right here. So I'm going to grab this, copy it. There's my jumbotron. Now I'd have to change I probably want to change some of the CSS. I'm going to change the text in there, etc. But I don't care for right now. Then I'm going to jump down into forms. That's pretty simple. Grab a little bit more complex of a form. Yeah, this one's good. More complex layouts. So I'm just going to grab this. Copy that to the clipboard. All right, and I'm going to come down here and put that in. Typically when you do this in Bootstrap, you go up to the top where you started and you take everything and you put it into a div with an ID equal container. So I've got that. I'm not going to worry. I'm not saving this anyway. I'm just showing you this. I'm going to come down to the bottom here right after my form tag. I'm going to end the div. right, now I'm going to save this. I'm just going to put it on the desktop as index.html. I have no idea what this is going to look like, but then I'm going to run it. All right, so again, I'd have to change it. You can see that it doesn't look very good, but notice I've already got a navigation bar. It's not showing everything because it's white, but there's stuff in there. There's my Jumbotron. There's my form. I didn't have to put in any code. Now, I'll have to put in some CSS to make it look the way I want it to look. All right, but even that, there's not a lot of CSS I'm going to have to add in here. All right, and last thing, and I promise I'm just not trying to waste your time or mine. This should be able to show you this. This is what Keegan and I are building in the afternoon. We're building, no, not there. All right, I know it's ugly. I just was playing with purple. I had a purple shirt on yesterday, so I looked at it. And we've got this, and this is our home page. Here's our about page that's got a, that picture didn't scale well here, but you can see that. And we've got a contact page where we've got this. So you can see it doesn't even look that different from what I just showed you. And the idea is when you're here, you come in here, and I don't have all the JavaScript in here yet, but for example, we'll type in here, we'll type in Facebook. All right, you'll click the button. Right now, nothing happens. But when you click the button, this will fill up with a bunch of, it's going out to what's called an API, so it's going out to the internet. It'll find out a bunch of information about Facebook stock. And it'll print in that box right here everything I want it to print. All right, and an API is an application program interface. All right. If you've never heard of one, go out and look at IMDb. That's the Internet database, Internet movie database. And it literally, supposedly has every movie ever made in there. We're going to probably use that one, and we're going to set up an API where you'll be able to list movies, list them by genre, list them by year, list them by producer, etc. That's the kind of stuff that we're moving towards. All right. But hopefully, you know, one thing you just got out of that little interlude that I put in there was we got a lot of stuff and we didn't have to do a lot of work. All right. So again, common page layouts that use grids, as it says. A lot of times it's for this. And as I mentioned, you don't be put off by the colors in here, okay? We already looked at this fixed sidebar one. And we already talked about the advanced ones and all the different stuff that you can do with that. Again, I don't think it helps a whole heck of a lot for me to sit and read stuff to you, but I would strongly recommend that you go through and take a look at what's in there. Again, I also gave you those 3 websites. I would start at W3 Schools and just look at their examples. If you have questions, please ask. Now, the last thing. Try to figure out where he's got the homework in the labs. I guess that's all web dev coursework. I don't want that one. I want this one. There we go. So I just want to show you, I'm going to send you this in just a couple of minutes. This will be the homework for Chapter 10. Complete the 28 levels. They want you to go out to CSS Grid Garden. When you get done, take a screenshot. Okay. Code the one layout using 3 different methods. All right. So go out to CSS Tricks and take a look at what they've got out there. All right. And for the labs for Chapter 10, Don't know what that is, if that's Evans or not. I have no idea. Yeah. Watch Evans and code along with his. It's 12 minutes and 45 seconds. So I will send you that stuff. I will send that out to you right now. All right, again, last time. Tomorrow then, tomorrow we will go over, so we now are through all of this, 1 through 10. All right. Tomorrow we will go over 11 and 12. 11 is on images and icons. We've already done much of that work. All right, we'll talk about the different kinds of images that exist, etc., the different extensions and what they mean, and a little bit on tables as well. All right, then on Thursday we'll go over that. We'll spend most of the period on Chapter 13. We'll actually create a form from scratch. All right, now since we're working only on the client side, when we click the submit button, it doesn't go anywhere. All right, I mean, I can show you how to make it go someplace, but it's not probably going to do anything unless you've got your own website you can send it out to, type of an idea. So we'll do that. We'll also, and this is a short chapter, go through how to add audio and video. And there's more than one way of doing it, as you probably guess. You can just put a hyperlink, but typically that's not the way you do it. All right. In fact, what we'll probably do is when we create this form, we'll embed some audio and some video into it, just so you'll be able to combine the stuff from both chapters together. Then again, on Friday, we'll do how to work with fonts and printing, and then we'll end up with how to use the CSS, transitions, transformations, etc. If we get done with all of that stuff, all right, then next week, maybe we'll just plan on like 8 to 9:30 or so, Monday through Thursday of next week, going over Bootstrap, and then you'll have 2 to 2.5 hours, 9:30 till 11:50, to do homework, work on the labs, work on the tests, etc. All of that work then, all right, the work for, the tests for chapters 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, if you haven't turned them in already, will be due by Friday. We're going to grade them as a class, all right? And I believe that we said last week that the actual lab and homework stuff is due then too, okay? The stuff for 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, I'm going to make it all due 2 weeks from Friday. So 2 weeks from Friday then will be the 16th. All right. If you get them done before that, great. Just let me know. All right. But I probably won't grade them until then, because I like to grade them when everyone has theirs done. All right. So you can plan on at least a week of Bootstrap next week. We'll see where we are at the end of the week. Then I've got to go online and look and see if Evan is giving a midterm. Because if he gives one, I'm supposed to give one. We're supposed to remain lockstep with one another. We did have a student last year, if you didn't hear this, I guess it was last fall. Yeah, last fall. She lives in Baldwin, and she took the first year of the program in St. Louis, but didn't like the drive. Tried to drive here and liked it better, so she did the second year of the program here. All right, and great student, great person, Grace. And but the point is, they wanted to make sure we were covering the exact same stuff. So she wasn't missing anything. She was taking the same test, the same everything. All right. All right. If you have no questions, then like I said, I will send you the homework and the labs for Chapter 10. All right. And if I have time, maybe I'll just send all the ones out through Chapter 16. All right. Just send all that stuff out to you, so you can start working on that at whatever. Again, please make sure on all these tests that you've got that I gave you out today, put on there due Friday, October 2nd, because we will be going over all of those on Friday. All right, and I mean, I've said this, you're all here, well, Jimmy's not in the room, but you're all here, that don't miss Friday, please. Oh, I missed Friday, and then I got, come in on Monday, well, I got them all done. That's not the way it works. You have had a lot of time to do those tests. All right? Okay, that's all I got.